I am Fran Stern, and as Chessie said, I am one of the grants and homeowner tax credits representatives at the State Historic Preservation Office. There's a couple of us. And for tax credits, Saranac Lake is my territory, which I always love because Saranac Lake is absolutely one of my favorite places in New York State. So if you are considering doing work on your property, or you are interested in pursuing a tax credit application, then I will definitely be one of the people helping you with this process. I love talking about this program because I think it is just such an excellent resource for homeowners. I wish I could use it myself, but as we'll get into when I start talking about eligibility, you'll see that there are certain eligibility concerns, but basically it's a program that's meant to help property owners of historic properties take care of them by providing a little bit of a financial incentive in the form of a tax credit. So we're very fortunate to have this. And another thing that I always say is owning a home is certainly a lot of responsibility. Owning a historic home has a little bit of an extra responsibility because there's lots of things to think about in terms of maintenance. And the way that I like to frame or phrase this is that the tax credit program is really meant to help you through some of these concerns, not hinder you in any way. So, because I know when we start thinking about applications and requirements and pre-approvals, it can get a little overwhelming, but I can assure you that we're definitely here to help, and we want your project to be successful. So the New York State Historic Preservation Office is actually part of the agency of the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. And so we are the state agency that is tasked with providing safe and enjoyable recreational and educational opportunities for New Yorkers. And we're also charged with advancing historic preservation efforts across New York State. So within OPRHP, the SHPO, a state historic preservation office is something that every state in the US has. We offer programs and services that help individuals and communities achieve social, economic, and environmental benefits associated with historic preservation. And as we've seen time and time again in New York State, as well as nationwide, historic preservation is certainly something that can provide a deep sense of place, a good sense of community spirit. There's economic benefits, there's social benefits, there's environmental benefits. So we just love talking about preservation because it's really something that is for everyone. And Saranac Lake is one of the most historic places in New York. So that's exciting. So we offer and administer the New York State Historic Homeownership Tax Credit Program, which is really what we're here today to talk about. And basically what it is, it's a program where if you seek pre-approval for doing certain work items on your home, the credit will actually cover up to 20% of those qualified rehabilitation expenditures. So if you're thinking about doing a project, you're going to be spending money to work with contractors or buy materials for a certain home improvement project that is a permanent capital improvement, then you can potentially claim a tax credit. So the tax credit is a little bit different than a deduction. I get this question a lot. A tax credit is actually a dollar for dollar reduction in the amount of New York State income tax that you owe. So this doesn't apply to your property taxes at all. It will apply to your income tax bill. But if your adjusted gross income is below $60,000, then after that credit is applied to your income tax bill, you can actually claim the remainder of the credit as a refund. So you'll actually receive a check in the mail. So it's a good way to offset some of those major expenses that you are encountering when you're doing work on your property. So there are a couple different eligibility concerns for the credit. The credit is definitely for New York State taxpayers, and we certainly have communities in New York State, especially in the North Country, where we do have out-of-state residents that own properties. If you don't pay taxes, income taxes in New York State, then this credit isn't for you. The building has to be listed on the state and national registers of historic places, either individually or in a historic district. Within Saranac Lake right now, there are many, many cure cottages that are actually listed individually, and they have been for many years. There are also a couple different historic districts that encompass a wide variety of properties. And I'm sure that there are more eligible properties as well. It's just, we haven't documented and studied those yet. In order to use the tax credit, the properties also have to be located in what's called a qualifying census tract. This is an area where there has been a census study done that determines that the median family income is either at or below the state median family income level. So basically, it's a way for the Census Bureau to indicate that this area is deserving of tax credits because it's financially or economically distressed. The way that I also like to explain this is that we have a lot of higher, very, very high incomes in communities downstate in New York City. So actually, much of upstate New York falls within a qualifying census tract. Saranac Lake is one place in particular where there is certain sections of the city that qualify and certain sections that don't. But we've had this come up before where we've had individuals approach us and be curious about using the tax credit. And oftentimes the properties are close enough to that line where we can actually accept them into the program. So if you're concerned about this or you have questions as you're thinking about doing an application, I would encourage you to reach out at any time because we are able to make decisions about who is eligible based on proximity to census like that. Make an application to the tax credit program, then you should be prepared to spend at least $5,000 on qualified projects. And I understand that, a lot of the time spending $5,000 on something that involves home repair, that can actually be a very overwhelming or huge expense for some individuals. And the cool thing about this is you don't have to do it all at once. You can actually build up expenditures on your home until you meet that threshold. But when it comes to actually claim the credit, in order to make that complete application and get a certificate of completion, you will have to demonstrate that you've spent at least $5,000 on work items that our office has approved. And at least 5% of the work that you do has to be on the exterior of the property. And the reasoning for that is because it's a tax credit program that's offered by New York State. There has to be some kind of public benefit involved. And so New York State is expecting that folks will make some improvements to the exteriors of their property that folks in the neighborhood can, benefit from. But there are a lot of projects that qualify, and we'll go over some specific examples of that. So generally, when you're thinking about doing a project, that's the best time to contact us. I have a lot of people that call or email me regularly, and they say, I'm interested in doing X, Y, and Z on my house next year. What do you think? Or I'm thinking about scheduling contractors. That is definitely the best time to reach out to us because our office does have to approve the work that you're planning on doing before you begin. There are some items that don't qualify. There are some items that we might have questions about or want to advise you differently as you're taking care of your property. There is a fee associated with the application. The application comes in a couple different parts. Parts 1 and 2 are submitted first before you do the work on your property. Part 3 is submitted a little bit later. And there are fees that are associated with those unless you are meeting that income qualification where your adjusted gross income is either at or below $60,000. So that's a very simple thing. And actually at the moment, what I can say that's new and coming in the future is that we're working on a way for folks to completely submit these applications online, including paying fees with a credit card. Because the way that we have it right now is that you send hard copy paperwork into our office as well as a check, and that's not always convenient or easy for everyone. And so we're working on adding more options to make it even easier to submit this paperwork. Because I know the last thing that everyone wants to think about when they're doing a home project is filling out more paperwork. So we're really trying to make it as easy as possible. So the other thing is that you can apply for this credit multiple times. We have folks that apply for the credit every year if they've got major renovations or projects going on. You also can roll over a credit application for several years if that is easiest. So if you're working on building up to that $5,000 spending threshold, that is completely fine. We have folks that are submitting part threes this year for applications that they started in 2018 or 2019, happens all the time. And it's designed to be flexible and to work with you and your situation. So if you also have questions about how to break up projects that you're doing, or you want to talk specifically about how things are going on around your house, that's something that we can totally help with, and we're happy to. So when we get down to the nitty gritty of work items that qualify, there are a ton of them. It's basically anything that you can think about where, as if you were going to pick up your house, turn it upside down and shake it, things that would fall out like appliances, furniture, other decor or furnishings that are not permanent, those won't qualify, but things that are permanently attached to the house and its systems, they will definitely qualify. So if you have a project to do that concerns a structural system like your foundation, roof, floor joist, ceiling, or attic rafters, we see roof replacements all the time, or roof patches or repairs. I personally, I have a slate roof. I have to replace slates every year. So this is something I wish I could use for that. Exterior walls, so brick, wood, and stone repair, painting, cornices, it really depends on your property. These are all expenses that are considered exterior, and someone had asked a question specifically about that. So we would consider these things to be exterior. Other things that qualify, things like porches. Saranac Lake is an area where many of the buildings have cure porches. That's one of the historic features of the area. So if you need to do some work on your cure porch, stoops, window rehab or replacement, masonry, interior work, there's a whole bunch of things on the inside of your house that might qualify. So painting rooms, refinishing floors, fixing walls, and also systems. Every home has a set of systems, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, if you need to do any work like that. The program is designed to help you take care of your home in the way that you would want to make it safe, healthy, and comfortable. We also see applications from different areas of the state, especially New York City right now, where solar panels are very big, and solar panel installation will also count for the tax credit. So that is kind of cool and exciting. But they should not be seen from a principal elevation or where the public can generally see them, because again, we're looking for work that is going to maintain the integrity of the historic property. So there are things that don't qualify, unfortunately, and we do get asked these questions from time to time, but things that are not part of the main footprint of the house. So things like landscaping, fencing, lighting that is outside, that is remote or not attached to the building. That's one that we get asked all the time, or work that doesn't meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. So the goal of the program is to have you do work items that will help preserve that historic character of your home. So when we talk about Secretary standards, what are they? The Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation are standards that are issued by the National Park Service that we work with regularly. They're kind of like the preservationists' Bible or, code of conduct or something like that. There's 10 standards, and they are meant to guide decision-making processes about work or changes to historic properties. And even though there's 10 standards, it basically boils down to 3 concepts. We want to retain existing historic materials, repair damaged historic materials if they are deteriorated beyond repair, or replace them, if they're deteriorated beyond repair, but repair them if they are able to be repaired. So those are the kinds of things that we will aim to help you do with your property. So we want you to retain the historic character. So you should avoid things like removing character defining features such as moldings, trim, finishes, windows, changing spaces. On the inside, this will look like preserving historic floor plans, not changing the interior flow of your space, or removing significant features that characterize the appearance of your property on the inside. But again, We evaluate all of these things on a case-by-case basis. So if you have specific concerns about your home or you'd like to change something, these are things that you would be talking to us about. So one question that we get asked a lot about are windows. Windows are often proposed for replacement, and we always try to impress upon folks that repaired wood windows offer the same energy efficiency as a replacement, and they also really protect the historic character of your home. Because if you've ever seen a picture of a historic home that has had its windows replaced, it can really dramatically alter the appearance. With that said, there also are a lot of acceptable window replacement options on the market. So we will work with you to find an appropriate substitute if your windows have been damaged beyond repair. And a lot of the times we actually see applications from people that have had their windows replaced previously and the replacements are failing. So things like vinyl windows, they don't offer a very good life expectancy in terms of service. And so we can help find a more suitable substitute. We also are going to ask that you avoid damaging treatments. So when you have a masonry structure or you have some work to do on the foundation of your house, we might include some information about things that you'll want to think about throughout that process, because there are definitely treatments that are proposed to help historic buildings, but can actually harm them. So things like sandblasting brick, repointing and using mortar that doesn't match, that can actually cause more problems later. Insulation is a big one. I get asked about insulation all the time, and things like spray foam, things that are really not reversible. They can actually cause a lot of damage if not done properly and create moisture issues later. So those are other things that we can help guide you through. If something needs to be replaced, then we'll ask you to demonstrate that it's been deteriorated beyond repair and find a reasonable substitute that matches the historic character. Certainly if your roof is well beyond its lifespan and you need a new roof, that is definitely an expense that will qualify for the tax credit program, but we'll help you try to make decisions about how to maintain the historic look of your home. So rehabilitation versus restoration is another thing that I like to explain a little bit more in depth. Rehabilitation is using an old structure in a new way. Restoration is restoring everything exactly to that particular time period and using it in exactly the same way. So a lot of historic sites are full-on restorations. Rehabilitation would be taking something like an old industrial building and turning it into new hotel or set of lofts or something. And rehabilitation is a pretty good example to use when you're a homeowner as well, because we live differently now than people might have when they first built properties. So we don't expect you to go back in time and replace features and finishes that are not there. Things like an 1800s kitchen might not work for you, or an 1800s bathroom might not work for you. These spaces change over time. And the rule of the tax credit program also is that you work with what you have. So if you are doing a big new kitchen renovation, a lot of that work will qualify, even if it's not super historically accurate for that time period. So again, these are things that we look at on a case-by-case basis. So this one is about rental units. And we do have a lot of folks that apply for the tax credit program that have rental units in their property, especially in some of our cities like Buffalo and Rochester, where we have bigger two-family homes. You can definitely apply for the homeowner tax credit if you have a rental unit in your house. If you are applying for the homeowner credit program, the property has to be your primary residence. You can also apply for the program if you have a vacation property. So in places in the North Country, we do have a lot of folks that have summer homes, maybe in Thousand Island Park. If you use it as a primary residence at some point during the year, then you can apply for the tax credit program. There are some rules and calculations to consider, and we can help you through that. The other thing that I'll mention quickly is that, especially throughout the last year in the time of COVID, with folks working from home, If you have a home office or some other component of your home that you use to make income, then that is something that we'll want to know about as well. The application will ask for all of that information right up front. I always tell people, just make sure that what you're submitting to our office equals what you're putting on your taxes. So I'm not a tax professional, I'm not an accountant, I can't really give you financial advice, but if you make sure that what you are putting on your application matches what goes on your taxes, then that is generally a good way to be. So apologies that this slide has so many words on it, but basically you're going to want to determine the percentage of the square footage of your building that you occupy. So we see lots of different ratios. Generally they're 50-50, 75-25, or 66 and 33%. So the easiest example is if you live in a large home and you have a rental unit downstairs and you live on the top floor. So when you're preparing your scope of work, if this is the instance where you have an income producing component, you're going to want to remove any projects that are associated with the interior of the rental unit. So you can only apply for projects that are associated with your direct living space on the inside of the property. And then what this means for the outside of the property is that the entire exterior is considered a shared living space. So if you have a duplex, you rent out half of it, you live in it, you live in the other half of it, and you go to replace your roof. And the cost of the roof replacement is $20,000. You would submit an expenditure to our office for $10,000 because that roof is considered a shared space over both units. But again, this can definitely get a little bit confusing. If this is your specific situation, then we help answer these kinds of questions all the time. But we just like to make it clear that if you do have a rental unit, it doesn't automatically disqualify you from using the program. So there are also commercial tax credit programs for income producing properties strictly. And I do like to mention this during homeowner credit presentations because oftentimes you might be talking to a friend or a neighbor who owns an income producing property. There are two programs for commercial properties. So there's one offered through the federal government, and then there's another one offered through New York State. And it basically has many of the same rules. The property has to be listed in the National Register. The New York State side of the credit also requires the qualified census tract, and the rehabilitation meets the Secretary of the Interior standards. The threshold requirements for commercial projects are a little bit different. This has to do with spending an amount of money that is more than the adjusted basis of the building. So that is something that if you're interested in pursuing this, you'll work through with our staff. Usually this program is used a lot by developers. We've had many great historic rehabilitation success stories of developers who use these tax credits. And it really makes the program, it really makes these projects possible in some cases. So we just like to mention that. It is also possible to combine the commercial credit program as well as the homeowner credit program. So if you have a building like this, I think this one is in Oneonta maybe, but so a building like this where you have an income producing location on the bottom floor, and then you have residential space on the upper floors, it is possible to combine the programs. It's definitely going to be a little bit more complicated and you might need a larger project team, but this would be something that you would discuss with your field representative from our office. There also is a North Country commercial credit representative who we can easily get you contact information for if you need it. So the application process is very simple. I mentioned earlier it has 3 parts, but parts 1 and 2 are actually submitted together. Part 1 is where we determine that your building is eligible for the program by confirming that it is listed in the state and national registers of historic places. Part 2 is where you actually describe the work that you're going to be doing, and then you go out and you do your work. And then part 3 is where you submit photos and documentation to us showing that you completed the work you said you were going to, and we issue a certificate of completion. So we do have a section on our website that is dedicated to talking about the tax credit programs. There's also a very helpful FAQ and information instructions pamphlet. And that is something that I can provide to all of you, along with a PDF of all of these slides after this presentation is over, because the instruction sheet gives a ton of helpful information. So we'll ask for some personal information, your name, your address, your phone number. We correspond with tax credit applicants mostly through email, but we certainly can send hard copies of a letter if that would work better for you. We'll ask you a series of questions about your property, if it's at least 50 years old, if it's owner occupied, if it has an income producing use. And we will ask for a signature, as well as that processing fee that is included with the application. So preparing the scope of work is really simple. The forms can be downloaded from our website, but I also can send them to anyone who's interested in completing an application. It can be downloaded from our website. You can print them out and fill them out by hand. You can also fill them in on the computer. You can submit a separate typed document if that's easier for you. And as I mentioned, when we create the online portal, including the online payment portal, you will be able to do everything for this electronically if you would like to. But basically, the scope of work sheet is going to ask for the work that you're proposing, what condition it is currently in, and what you would like to do. So this is where you would say, my roof is worn out, it's leaking, I need to replace it. Or my foundation is having some issues, I need to do some repointing on my stone foundation. Or I'm painting, or things like that. You can use as many scope of worksheets as you'd like. You can submit for one item at a time if that works for you. It's completely up to you. We also are going to ask for estimated costs, but the cool thing here is that you do not have to have formal invoices or estimates from contractors. So when you're submitting a Part 1 and 2 application and you are looking for approval for the work items that you'll complete from our office, you can simply make ballpark estimates yourself about how much these work items are going to cost. The only time that final expenditures are required and super important to pay attention to are when you're submitting the Part 3. So that's after you've completed and paid for everything. We'll want to know exactly how much money you spent so that we can create an accurate certificate of completion for you. But I do get asked about invoices and contractor estimates all the time, and they're definitely not required. So we also are very interested in seeing photographs of your property. The really nice thing is that most cell phones now take excellent pictures. It is definitely okay with me if you email photographs to me. You can also include them in your application. We would like to see at least one overall exterior shot of your property, and images of everything that you are attempting to do work on as part of your Part 2, even if it's something really mundane, like taking a picture of an old boiler. It's just having that photographic documentation really helps us in processing your application. Floor plans are also really helpful, especially if you're doing a major project where you're going to be making some big changes and we need a really clear sense of what's going on. This can be something that you can draw yourself. These absolutely do not have to be prepared by an architect, but that's very helpful. Also, if it's keyed to a photograph, so we know what we're looking at, because it basically helps me as the reviewer be in the position where I can see and understand exactly what's going on at your house. If you're going to be using a replacement product, especially for something like a window, then we are going to want to see a specification from the manufacturer. So for things like windows and doors, this gets really important, because a window replacement, it'll tell you exactly what the material is, and that is something that we'll want to look very closely at. So if that is something that your project is going to require, then that's also good to keep in mind. So once you submit your Part 1 and 2 office to our application, we have approximately 30 days to turn around a response, and that's once it's received in our office. We do our absolute best to get things done very quickly, because we know that you have work to do on your property and we don't want to hold you up. There are many times where emergencies happen, and I do always like to say this in my presentations, your health, safety, and welfare in your home is of utmost importance. And so if something happens, like your roof starts leaking and you really need to fix it quickly, or you're having a major plumbing issue or something like that, you do not have to wait for our approval in that circumstance. If you have time to send us a note or give us a call, let us know what's going on, that's generally helpful. If you have an emergency situation and you forgot to submit your tax credit application until after it was over, definitely just talk to us. This is something that we look at all the time and we consider with each individual property owner. And I feel very, very strongly about making sure that homeowners know that we want to help you, and emergencies happen and your health and safety absolutely comes first. So when we issue that Part 2 approval letter, after we've reviewed the scope of work that you're planning to do, there are a couple things to keep in mind. We might insert a special condition, something that you or your contractor should be aware of. The things that I have conditions in my letters about the most are generally things like masonry. We get a lot of questions about masonry sealants or mortar repointing, carpets that must be attached permanently to the substrate, really interesting things like that. If it's a topic that is a preservation technical topic that I think you might benefit from some additional information on, then I will probably reference a preservation brief from the National Park Service. They have an excellent series of preservation briefs that talk about just about every topic in technical building preservation that you can think of. And I find that folks generally find those really helpful when they're doing a rehab project. This application process, like I said earlier, is designed to be super flexible. So if you submit for a series of work items and you decide that you have some additional work items that you need to do after you've gotten our office's approval, you can submit an amendment sheet anytime if you want to change something, if you want to add something. When you're doing any kind of big house project, I would definitely advise you to hang on to your receipts and keep records that also include our approval letters. However, I'm never going to ask for receipts from your contractors. Those are things that you should hang on to for your tax purposes, but I will not require those at any point in time. We also have had folks that get into situations where they start a project, they start working with a contractor and it doesn't really go according to plan and they are seriously worried that their project is in jeopardy. If that happens, stop and definitely give us a call and we'll see if we can help out. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does definitely happen sometimes. So I just like to reiterate that. So when you're all done, this is the really exciting part because this is when you'll send in, what we would see as transformation photos. And these can be for projects that are as simple as completing 1 or 2 work items, but we also have folks that use the tax credit program and they do major renovations of their properties. So Part 3 photos are generally very exciting because they show completed work, even if they're for very mundane items around your house. So the Part 3 form basically mirrors the Part 1 and 2 form. It has a very similar looking scope of work page where instead of saying what you are proposing to do, you will say the work items that you have completed, and then there should be a corresponding photo that goes with those. There are fees that are associated with Part 3, and those are based on the total amount of expenditures of your project. So it starts at, I think, $25 and it goes all the way up to $475. But most people who are doing projects that are under $50,000 in total, the final fee is $75. But there's a fee schedule on the instructions page, and we can also help you figure out what that final fee is. Unless you are exempt, that is certainly something that we can go over with you as well. So you should definitely record the costs of everything. Like I mentioned earlier, this is the part where it's really important to make sure that you're reflecting accurately what you've spent. There are some times where we do have to deny work. This is a pretty extreme example, but some leading causes of denials are completing work that doesn't meet the Secretary's standards. So you might have said that you were going to do something one way, but it looks completely different. As you can see here, the property on the left is a nice historic property that has some pretty interesting character defining features. And then the picture on the right shows the same property, but a lot of those features have been destroyed or removed. And that is something that would definitely jeopardize qualifying for the tax credit. Not having good photo documentation, obliterating intact historic floor plans, removing significant features. Those are all things that you want to avoid. We will work with you as much as possible to make sure that this doesn't happen. It's just, one of those extreme examples that have to go in presentations. But we will communicate. We communicate with all of our tax credit applicants at almost every step of the process. So this doesn't really happen that often. And at the end, I like to put some fun examples in of different things around the state. This is a property that suffered a lot of flood damage during tropical storms Irene and Lee down in the southern tier. And this family used the tax credit as they were doing rehab work. So it can really help in a time of crisis. We've had folks that have used the tax credit program to take a vacant property back into good new use in more urban areas of the state, like this one as well. And making major transformations, removing vinyl siding to take a property back to what it looked like originally. And this one. So we have time for Q&A, and since we're a relatively small group, we can also, if there's additional questions that come up, I see there's a lot of things popping up in the chat, so we'll talk about that. But if you have another question or you want to make a comment or something, I would welcome that also because we're such a small group. But let me. I'll stop sharing my screen and let's get to.
Fran, I was able to answer some of the questions in the chat for you.
Oh,
already.
See, I didn't even notice. I was too busy talking. That's awesome.
But there's a few that I didn't have answers to. So if you want to take a look at that.
Okay. So the first question that I see here is, if you are exempt from paying state taxes and you meet other criteria for a tax credit, can you still use this? That's probably a question for tax and finance or an accountant. Because again, when it comes to how the credit is actually claimed and what it's going to look like for you financially, I'm not really the best person to answer that. But we might be able to help you find someone to talk to. So sorry if that was a disappointing answer. Are the Finger Lakes, specifically Schuyler County, part of a qualifying census tract? Off the top of my head, I can say that I think that there are significant portions of Schuyler County that are part of a qualifying census tract, but if there's a specific community that we can look into, then I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I checked the maps real quick, and it looks like most, if not all, the county is covered.
Yeah, there's a lot.
But the best way to know is for people to just send us an email with the address, and we can look it up and verify it.
Yeah, exactly.
Should I do that now?
If you want to.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. How long does an application for a project take before being approved? So as I mentioned, once something is received by our office, I have 30 days to review it and turn it around. All of these tax credit applications, they go to Dan first to verify eligibility for the National Register or listing in the National Register. And they come to me for review. I try to get things off my plate as soon as possible because I know that people are very busy and they want to be doing tax credit. They want to get started on tax credit projects. It also kind of depends on the time of year. December is exceptionally busy for us because that's when everyone's finishing up their work for the year and submitting part 3s. So it might take me a little bit longer to get something to you. If you're concerned, then you can reach out to me at any time and say, hey, I have a question. Can you take a look at this? Or can we talk about this? Or, hey, I'm having an emergency situation. I need to have a contractor come over tomorrow. Is that okay? I try to make myself as accessible as possible. Is insulation included? Yes, for sure. And insulation is something that I get asked about all the time when it comes to historic properties. There are definitely things to consider when it comes to insulation. I like to use the example of if you're cold, generally, if you put a hat and socks on, that is going to help you feel warm right away. So I'll ask you some questions about whether or not your attic or your basement crawl spaces are insulated. When it comes to other insulation questions like opening up walls and completely spray foam coating them, that's something that I might advise against. But you know, again, this is specific to each individual property, and so we can definitely help with questions about that. Let's see. This is a good one. I'm having trouble finding contractors for certain types of work. Are you able to recommend them? As employees of New York State, we are actually not able to make recommendations for contractors of any kind. I also can't recommend specific product types. So when I was talking about replacement windows earlier, there are certain brands of replacement windows that make product types that are acceptable for historic properties. I can't actually recommend brands in the same way I can't recommend contractors, but I can certainly give advice about materials, type, methodology. When it comes to contractors, I'm not sure, you know, Historic Saranac Lake might be able to help with something like that. But
we have some people that we have worked with, and also some people who have reached out to us specifically, you know, as doing historic work. We also try not to recommend one exact person or the other. We might give you a list of people that we're aware of, but you know, you can always reach out to us. And we, as a fellow historic property owner in Saranac Lake, I can also help point you to some places where people are talking about different contractors and resources. So that's also something I'd be happy to do. So you can always get in touch with us.
Thank you.
yeah. So we went over a lot of things in the chat box, but I just wanted to make sure that I didn't forget to get to some of the questions that were asked ahead of time as well. And then we can always circle back if anyone else has anything to add. We had a question about what constitutes exterior work, and we kind of went over that during the presentation, but that would generally be things on the outside of the property. So fixing siding, gutters, that's another big one that people don't always think about. Gutters are great. Roofs, we would consider windows an exterior expense as well. So if you're doing work to repair windows or you need some replacement windows, that's something. But if you're confused about exterior, interior, and how that 5% rule is going to work, that's something that we can go over, because again, it's different for everybody. So the other questions that we did get a few questions about eligibility for the National Register, and that's Dan's territory. So I'm going to let him say a few words about what constitutes eligibility and how that process works. When it comes to the National Register, we have a whole other presentation on that, and maybe one day we can prepare one of those for you all. But
Okay, so I don't have a pretty presentation like Fran had, so I apologize for that. But if you want to figure out if your property is eligible, the way that it typically works is that I would ask that you submit some basic information about the property, photos of the interior and exterior, and as much history that you have about it already to me. And I would take a look at that. And so what I'm going to be looking for is whether or not the property is significant in one of 4 areas, at least. Does it represent broad patterns of history? Does it have an association with a significant person? Does it have architectural significance? Or in the 4th area is typically only used for archaeological sites, but it relates to research potential. Sometimes you could use that for buildings, but typically not. And so if it meets at least one of those, then I am looking to see if it has enough physical integrity to convey that significance. And if it does, and it is 50 years old or older, typically, then congratulations, you're eligible for the National Register. And then I would provide typically a one-page response, roughly, that kind of summarizes my findings and gives a physical description of the property. And from there, if you wanted to pursue a National Register nomination, I would recommend that you work with a historian or an architectural historian, and they, preferably somebody that has worked on this process before and has some familiarity with it, to write the document for you. Typically, they're around 10 to 30 pages, depending on the complexity of the property, and it largely consists of two sections. One is a sort of detailed physical description that kind of goes over the whole building from the top to the bottom and the outside to the inside, talking about the important features of it that relate to the significance of the property. And then the second part is more about the historic context, the history that you have about it, and that we're able to discover through additional research. So the first part is the physical description. The second part sort of explains why it's important. And it will call out those, whether it's a broad pattern of history, the person it's associated with, or the architectural style, and it will give more detail on that. And once the nomination is submitted to us, we review it. We don't typically write them. We do on occasion, but it's pretty infrequent. So normally our role is more editorial and getting it through the process to make sure that it's ready to be presented to the State Review Board, and they meet 4 times a year. And we present the nominations and they vote on them. Typically speaking, we don't bring them to the board unless we're pretty confident that they'll pass. So while it's not just a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a required step and it's important, but if we've gotten to that point, we're usually pretty confident that it'll get approved. At that point, it would get signed by our deputy commissioner, and then it's on the state register of historic places. At that point, we would then send it off to the National Park Service, and they would review it as well. And assuming that they don't have any issues or find anything that we missed, then they would add it to the National Register of Historic Places. And that's pretty much the whole process from the beginning to the end. And I realize that that's also kind of like a lot to take in all at once. And I'm happy to email that to anybody. I sort of have a kind of a boilerplate email response that covers all of this. And I included my email address at the beginning of the chat room. So don't feel like you needed to take notes or remember all of that. But it's basically, is it significant in one of these areas, and does it have the physical integrity to convey that significance? That's what we're looking for.
I didn't want to interrupt you, Dan, but HSL is happy to help with that first part. But we're here, to help both with research on your properties, especially here in Saranac Lake. Of course, most of the nominations we do are cure cottages. And so one of the things that you're going to want to try and find is evidence of TB patients staying in your house, hence the cure cottage part. So we can help by looking in our records here at the museum, as well as connecting you with the records at the library and elsewhere, to say, oh, yep, in 1915, there were 6 patients staying in the house, and it's recorded by the TB Society, et cetera. And then the other part is that we can help with that historic narrative about the house as well. We have, I don't know the numbers anymore, more than 200 something properties in Saranac Lake, a lot of which we nominated as an organization. And so, as well as those historic districts, there's 5 or 6 of them now. So we can help you with the history part to explain what's the significance of a cure cottage, what was the tuberculosis industry, what are those architectural features that make it special. And we also have historic sort of consultants that we work with locally who know a lot about cure cottages. One of them is our former executive director, and she was, had a hand in a ton of those nominations. So we can do things like have them, of course, right now that's a little bit difficult, but have them come by the house and talk about the cure cottage features that you might see, things like that. So We are here. We want to help you. We want your cure cottages to be preserved, and we want to help you take care of them, just like the SHPO. So, just reach out to us if you want to start this process. You can start with us, and I might, sort of kick you down the line to Dan, but we can help in a lot of ways, and we've done this many, many times. I don't say that from personal experience. My house is still not listed. The cobbler's children have no shoes. But HSL is an organization. We have a lot of experience doing it. So please contact us.
Yeah, what an awesome resource. The National Register is one of the best preservation tools that we have. It was created when the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 was enacted. And it is a tool that really helps us celebrate and document our history. It also is directly connected to both federal and state preservation law, so it can act as a measure of protection in certain circumstances. It's not going to tell you what color you can paint your house. It's not going to very tightly regulate what you can and can't do with your property. If you're using the National Register to apply for the tax credit, and that's where we might guide you to do the right thing, but it's not as restrictive as many people assume it is when they think about historic nations. And so we're always trying to dispel any sort of myths about that, because it's really meant to help property owners.
And it's also what we also tell people too, is that it's really about it's not about preventing you from using your property or changing it how you want to. It's really about making sure that government agencies aren't having a negative impact on it. And so anything that's being permitted, licensed, or funded by a state or federal agency because of state and federal laws has to consider historic preservation before they can approve whatever that action is. So that's really the point of these laws. It's so that agencies are considering these things before they let people go and do something.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had another interesting question that I wanted to make sure I answered, and this was about whether or not New York has an annual allocation of tax credits. What's the current allocation? Are there other programs that dovetail nicely, like forgivable loans, facade donations, and environmental remediation awards? I thought that this was a really interesting question. So the way that it is right now is that the tax credit is actually written into New York State law. So there is a tax and finance law that enables us to administer and offer this program. Right now, the program is authorized through 2024. We have many friends, colleagues, and representatives that are always working to lobby and help our legislators understand that this is an important resource that we need to keep around. So we have no reason to believe that the program is going to be terminated at any point. It's just right now our current authorization is through 2024. As for a formal allocation, I don't think that there's a dollar amount allocation. The program is available to anyone who is eligible for it and meets those requirements. And as for other programs that might complement this nicely, I'm not sure if I have specific examples of other programs that you can use. We are not going to ask for any detailed financial information like how you're paying for the work that you're doing on your tax credit project. So if you have you're interested in using a loan, a building improvement loan or something like that, that's not information that we'll ask for. We'll simply ask for your estimated costs, how much money you've spent. It's our job to certify the work that you're doing that is technically appropriate for the property, not to get involved in your tax filing process. But when it comes time to apply for the credit, we can certainly help you find the forms that you'll need. Because basically, in order to claim the credit after we issue a certificate of completion, you'll fill out a form directly through New York State Tax and Finance. It's called IT 237, and it basically you list your project number, the amount that we've credited you for, you submit that, and then they will process your tax credit. So that's that's that. And as for the other questions, if my home isn't National Register listed, does it still qualify for the tax credit program? No, unfortunately, this program is limited to those properties that are listed in the National Register. But as we just talked about, National Register designation, it is a little bit of an intensive process, but it can have lots of benefits in the long run. So if that's something that you're interested in pursuing, then we would highly recommend at least looking into it. And we also discussed the application process in detail, but if anyone has additional questions that we didn't answer, then feel free to ask those at any time. And
It looks like
I'm always thrilled to do these types of things, and so happy to talk about this program. So thanks for being here.
Fran, real quick, there's one question that I think we missed in the chat.
Oh, okay.
That is how to check if they can take the credit. And she says she's putting on a new roof this year. Should she start an application?
Well, if I'm not interpreting this correctly, let me know. But if, to me, that means, is the property eligible for the tax credit, and are you a New York State taxpayer? If your property is, if you need help determining eligibility, that's something that we can definitely look up. Let's see, you said you don't pay state taxes. Then we might have to find a contact from Tax and Finance for you to talk to. I'm not sure exactly how that would work, but I can see if there's someone who can answer that question.
Can I ask a question? Is there any downside to once you are on the register? Does that limit you as a homeowner?
No, that's a really good question. And we do get asked this quite often because there are different levels of historic designation in New York State. So the unit at the State Historic Preservation Office that I'm in, we also deal with something called Certified Local Government Program. We have a lot of communities in New York State that have chosen to regulate the character of their properties locally. So if you ever hear of a friend or a colleague or a neighbor who has to report to an architectural review board or a preservation board in their community before they're doing a project, those are communities where there might be a locally regulated historic preservation ordinance. And that is not the same as a National Register district. We have many, many National Register historic districts in New York State. We have many locally designated communities, but they don't always overlap. They're not always the same. And if a community does have a local preservation ordinance and they comply with a series of other regulations, then that is what qualifies them for inclusion in the Certified Local Government Program. But yeah, I know that that distinction can be a little bit confusing, but if your home is listed on the National Register and you don't have an architectural review or a preservation board in your community, then you have all the freedom and flexibility that the National Register offers. So if you're not using state or federal funding or permits or licensing, then you have a lot of flexibility.
I would also add to that if you were seeking state or federal money for something that you wanted to do on your house yourself, it would end up getting reviewed by our office. But even if the property wasn't listed, if it was eligible, and we would make that evaluation when the project comes in. So if you're interested in the National Register, but you're kind of concerned about that part of it, I wouldn't be, because we would look at it anyway, regardless. So if it's eligible, whether it's listed or not, we would still weigh in on it. So it's not really going to, that shouldn't be a hurdle for you. So if you're interested in the program, I would recommend you pursue it.
Thank you.
I just put my email in the chat box. I know that we had put it at the top, but if anyone has specific questions and they want to talk to me about their property or a potential project, then we can do that. as well. And if anyone has questions about the National Register, that is Dan's email address.
And I will share their contact information as well as the SHPO site and Fran's slides, etc., all when we send the recording out via email. So if you can contact or copy this now, great. If you don't get to it, it'll come to you direct to your inbox. So.
And I just saw Lynn's question in the chat. She says, I'm still confused. My Cure Cottage is state listed and on the National Register. Who should I talk to? Historic Saranac Lake. I mean, you could talk to them if you'd like. If you can also talk to me. I would be sort of, if you're coming in for a tax credit, it would kind of, I'm sort of the first point of contact to make sure that it's listed, and if it's not, if it's eligible, getting that process started. But in this case, it says that you said it's already listed. So it sounds like you could just go ahead with an application.
Yeah, I think, Lynn, it depends a little on what you're looking to do, of course. If you want to find out info on the history of the house or something, you can talk to us. But if it's the tax credit, then that's the first step.
Yeah, I always like talking to folks this time of year because wintertime is generally a nice time to start planning all those spring and summer projects that you're going to do. So we will probably start to see an influx of requests for different qualifying work items. And yeah, we're here to help anytime.
Okay, well, I think that's all the questions we had in the chat. And so I think we can wrap it up for today. Like I said, we are recording, so you will get this. And I can put my email also in the chat. My email is very long. So if you want to reach out to me with questions about your property, things like that. And of course, even if you want to just start with me and I tell you go straight to Fran, that's fine. We all work together. Another great resource I want to point out before I forget is our local wiki site. It's not comprehensive, but there are more than 6,000 pages on local history on there. So if you wanted to see what we know about your house, you could pull it up on the wiki. If you know something about your house that you think is cool or want to share with us, you can add it to the wiki. It's a really great resource. It often has things like photographs, links to the National Register nomination, things like that. So that is this address. So that is always available to you online for free as well. So thank you everyone who joined us today. And of course, thank you to Fran and Dan for helping us with this process. And like I said, email all of us and we'll hopefully hear more about your project soon.